Good afternoon, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Josh Beers. I am the campus director at UC Merced for CITRIS. Where I also serve as a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, and Associate Dean for Research in the School of Engineering. And it's my pleasure to join you today to introduce our next speaker. We're now in our 13th year of the CITRIS Research Exchange Seminar Series, and 21 years of CITRIS as an organization, which is pretty exciting. And the value add from the seminar series, as you know, is tremendous, especially bringing outside speakers to think about all the latest and greatest in research in and around technology in the interest of society. So thank you. We have a remarkable lineup of technology innovators in person at CITRIS Hall, and we're glad to see all of you joining virtually today for the Fall 2021 series. Big shout out to CITRIS at UC Merced as well, and everybody else tuning in from the other campuses and beyond. And so without further ado, I'd like to get going with that. It is my tremendous pleasure to invite Margaret Burnett to the stage, a virtual one. Margaret is a distinguished professor at Oregon State University. She began her career in industry, where she was the first woman software developer ever hired at Procter Gamble at Ivorydale. A few degrees later, she joined academia, and she went on to co-found the area of end-user software engineering, which aims to enable computer users not trained in programming to improve their own software. And she also co-leads the team that created GenderMag, a software inspection process that uncovers user-facing gender biases in technology environments. Together with her collaborators and students, she has contributed to some of the seminal work in both of those areas, and also in explaining artificial intelligence to ordinary end users. Margaret is not only an ACM Fellow and a member of ACM CHI Academy, she's an emeritus chair of the National Center for Women in Information Technology Academic Alliance, and also a colleague in a newly funded Artificial Intelligence Institute known as AgAid. And it was my pleasure to meet and work with her there, and my pleasure to ask her to join us today. So Margaret, without further ado, it is all yours.
Thank you, Josh. I'm going to bring up my slides. So let's get started. Yay. Okay. You know, I would love it if people who are comfortable doing so would turn on their cameras. Oh, I see. All I get to see is the panelists, isn't it? I don't get to see the participants. Oh, well. Okay, because I do like to see faces. All right, anyway, so today I'm going to talk to you about inclusive design. And this is a talk that's really based on actionability. So I'm going to give you some actionable steps that you all can take going forward. And gosh, I sure hope you will. So we have a method called GenderMag, and I'm going to start by talking to you about that. And then we'll generalize a bit. So gender and software, how do these even relate? Well, it turns out that most software has what we call gender bias bugs in it. And so here is a worried software developer thinking about their already overflowing workload, and they're saying, you know, you're kidding, where? And the answer is in the software you create, and even in the tools that you use to create that software. So this software developer is not excited about having to do even more work. And they're saying, like, does this really matter? And the answer is yes, it matters a lot, because every single time a user encounters one of these biases, they pay like a cognitive tax, just draining their mental energy every single time they hit one of these what we call inclusivity bugs. And there are even more reasons to care, because even if you don't particularly care about biases against particular populations, you probably do care about better technology. And it turns out, this is a very well-known finding from the design community, addressing an underserved population segment can help everyone. And the classic example of that, which perhaps some of you have already heard of, is curb cuts. You know, curb cuts, those cutout places in the sidewalk. Well, in the old days, there were no curb cuts. And somebody noticed somebody in a wheelchair having to deal with situations like this. And they said, you know, we have to do something about this. We really need curb cuts. Well, because there's a lot of backstory, but curb cuts were eventually born. And they did help people in wheelchairs. So yay. And they helped people with those wheeled walkers as well. And they helped parents pushing their babies in strollers. And they helped people on bicycles. And they helped people pushing heavy bales of hay on their dollies. And they helped people who have suitcases on wheels. So what happened here is by studying one underserved population, we ended up with a better product for everyone, including that underserved population. That's what inclusive design is all about. Now, hopefully I have you excited and ready to go forward with inclusive design efforts. But before you do, I want to tell you what not to do. Shrink it and pink it. This is a bad idea. This is a real thing. If you haven't already heard of it, you'll find it easily on Google. One of the classic examples is Dell's pink laptops. So back in the day, 2009, some brainy person at Dell decided that it would be a great idea to sell more laptops if they painted them pink. And they also thought it would be great to come up with a website with recipes and stuff so that it would appeal to women. Well, 2009 was before the days of Twitter. How long, just guess, put it into the chat and maybe Josh or somebody can read it out to me. How long do you think that website lasted? And keep in mind, this is before Twitter. Any guesses? Anything?
1 day.
1 day, guess shorter.
Oh dear.
Go ahead.
2 hours, I see.
Guess smaller. It lasted 20 minutes. 20 minutes before the outcry was so great and Dell was so embarrassed, they took down that website. So, okay, at least that was back in 2009. Maybe we can believe we've grown since then. But here's Bic for Her, which also goes way back, but is still on the market. So some brainy person at Bic decided, okay, we want to sell more more pens to women. So I have this awesome idea. We'll give them some pink and purple ones with sparklies and a label for her and raise the price. Okay. So this is what they did, and this is what they still do, and the price is still greater. So when these came out, some of you may have seen the blog post by Ellen, the talk show host. It starts like this. Oh, my feeble hand. Before Bic for Her, I couldn't write my own recipes. I had to get my husband to do it. But now, thanks to Bic for Her, okay, so approaches like these are such bad ideas for so many reasons. They are so stereotype enforcing, denigrating to certain populations, let alone raising the price. I mean, really? But there's even another reason why they are such bad ideas. They don't work because nobody is typical. There's no typical man or woman or female or male or any other gender, because being a member of some gender is a very complicated proposition, and not all people fit into any particular bucket. So if we tried to come up with different versions of software and technology for different genders, what we would end up with is 2 versions or more that didn't actually work for very many people, because you just can't divide the world into buckets. So what we have to do to be inclusive is we have to get out of the dividing mindset. It's not about categorizing people. It's about debugging. It's about finding barriers that particularly affect some underserved population and taking down that barrier as though it were a bug, so it's not there anymore. So that's the key to inclusive software. Okay, so where do to the kinds of inclusivity bugs that I'm alluding to, where do these lurk? Well, the answer is kind of everywhere. So the first bullet item you can see here is open source projects and the GitHub platform. And by the way, there are papers on all of these documenting these. Another example, programming environments, big time. Spreadsheets, e-learning systems, robotics, mobile applications, even help systems, websites, big time, digital libraries, and more. These bias bugs, and particularly I'm talking about the gender bias bugs that I alluded to so far, all of these are well documented in so many platforms. And that's not all. They're also in Academia-ware. So those of you in the audience who are academics, it's right there in your home environment too. So the software with which academia does business, the admission applications, the registration systems, the IT support web pages, all of these also have these same inclusivity bugs in them. And so really, some people in academia, we develop these solutions and we say, why doesn't industry use them? But right here, we have to start with our own houses. And so I'm really happy to say that Oregon State University, the department, the group that deals with the business side of our IT, not the academic side, the people who work on admission applications and all these things, they are starting on it, and other universities are starting on it too. So this is one action you can take right now, is if you have the ear of your university's IT groups, you could start them starting to look for inclusivity bugs in their own products, and believe me, they have them. This is one graph that came from one team's analysis of their own software. This is, again, Academia-ware. They used GenderMag, and of the things they looked at, 46%, they did not find inclusivity bugs. 3% of what they looked at, they found generic usability bugs, and 51% of what they looked at, they found inclusivity bugs. So it's actionable. And here's how. You can use GenderMag on, well, your university IT's department can use it on their IT. Anybody who builds any technology can use GenderMag. And here's how it works. You start by picking one of the personas that's built into GenderMag. I pick Abby, check. Then you pick a use case or a scenario that you hope your IT supports. I'm about to show you, here we are, a screen from an app that some students were building. It's an augmented physical bookstore app. Think of it as Google Maps for inside the bookstore. And so for the use case that they were evaluating in their own IT, they picked Abby wants to find science fiction books. Okay, good, we are ready. And then what we do is we walk through that scenario with the sub-goals and actions that we hope users like Abby will take. And so it looks like this. We're starting with Abby looking at this screen, and we ask the developer, what do you wish Abby was thinking right now about what she'd like to do? So sub-goals are in the head. It's not about her fingers yet. And the developers say, what we hope is that when she's looking at this, she wants to see a map. So that was up to the developers to tell us. And then all we have to do as evaluators is say, will Abby have this sub-goal? Yes, no, maybe, and why? And the way we find this out is we consult the persona, particular aspects of it that speak to whether or not Abby might have a sub-goal like this. Then, regardless of whether Abby did or didn't have that sub-goal, we answer it, we write it all down, and that's the beginning of our inclusivity bug report. So now we've got something that at the end we can triage. In any case, even if Abby didn't have the goal before, now she does. We push it into her head so that we can go on with the actions we want her to take if she has that sub-goal. So we then turn to the developers again and say, if Abby has that sub goal. What do you want her to do with her fingers? That's what actions are. And they say, we want her to tap browse off. Okay, maybe you all don't agree, but that's what the developers said. And so that's what we evaluate. And so then we say, will Abby do this? Yes, no, maybe, and why? Again, we look at the various attributes of Abby to answer that question. We write it all down, including the reasons, continuing in our inclusivity bug report. Finally, we make Abby do that. So we tap that. I haven't shown the screen that results, but we look at the resulting screen and then we say, will Abby see that this resulted in progress toward her sub-goal? Yes, no, maybe, and why? And again, we consult Abby to answer these questions. And that's all there is. We just loop through every step that it takes to complete the scenario, find science fiction books, until Abby gets there. And then we have the inclusivity bug report. Here's one of the whys that one of the participants of this analysis said. They said, Abby's not inclined to push and poke. So no, she's not going to push that. So what's behind all this? Well, at the core of GenderMag, which stands for Gender Inclusiveness Magnifier, at the core of that are 5 facets. A person's motivations, their information processing style, their computer self-efficacy, their risk aversion, and their learning style for learning new technologies when they're sitting in front of them. So this is the core of the method. You'll notice that gender identification is not one of these attributes. What we found is that these attributes are very important to getting rid of gender biases, and that's why they're there. And you don't actually need gender identification in order to achieve this inclusivity. Then the job of the personas, like Abby, is to bring those facets to life. So let's take a closer look at Abby. Here's Abby. First thing I want you to notice is that Abby fits on one page. This is a persona. A persona is a fictional person. Many personas are long. Ours is short. And it has bullets and underlined things. That's because it's aimed for busy software professionals. Second thing I want you to notice is there's a top half and a bottom half. The top half is entirely customizable. So in this sample, in this sort of original version of Abby, we have her as 28 years old, employed as an accountant, living in Cardiff, Wales, and having certain hobbies. You can pick any job title or no job title at all, any age, any photo, any living location, any hobbies, anything that puts your Abby into the target customer base for the technology you're talking about. So if you're evaluating universities' Academia-ware, like class registration systems, you'd probably make Abby an undergraduate student. If you're aiming for, I don't know, a dispatch system, then Abby will maybe be a dispatcher. All of these things are entirely customizable. What's not customizable is the facet values. So here you can see each facet type listed, and Abby's particular facet values are given. These are not customizable. These are what define Abby. So let's take a closer look at one of them. Attitude toward risk. Now, this is relevant to technology because people view certain things as coming with a certain amount of risk. So Abby rarely has spare time. And as a result of that, she is risk averse about using unfamiliar technologies because she does not have the time to spend on a whole lot of learning curve. So she won't do it if she has another more familiar way to go about the same task. So let's look at some data behind where that came from. And by the way, all of these foundations, all of these data are available on the Persona Foundation documents at the GenderMag website. So this data came from a company. The company when they collected that data, collected it only from men and women. So those are the only two genders that we have represented in this graph. And the blue are the men and the yellow are the women. So the first thing I would like you to notice is how much overlap there is in between these two genders. And so this again points out that this just can't be about dividing people into piles, because you can't divide this data into piles by gender. The second thing is the difference in the distributions. So when we talk about gender differences in such things as attitude toward risk with technology, it's this difference in distribution that is behind saying that. Now, as a persona, Tim's job is to look out for the interests of all of these risk-tolerant people, regardless of their gender or anything else. Abby's job is to look out for the interests of all of these risk-averse people, and Pat's job is to pick up all of these people and represent their interests. Now, suppose, hypothetically, that you were building some technology and it turns out that your technology supported only people on this side, the Tim side of the line. Well, guess what? That's not hypothetical. That's exactly the way much of technology that's out there is built. So in that situation, how many men would we be excluding from supporting really well with that software? Well, a little over half, 100% minus 42%. And how many women? 75%. That's why that we again say that you need to pay attention to supporting the full spectrum of attitudes toward technology risk in order to not be biased against one or another gender. Okay, so what happens when the real world uses GenderMag? This is data from 17 teams. They used GenderMag to evaluate their own software. So we didn't do it, they did. And the blue percents here are the percent of things they looked at in their own software where they found inclusivity bugs. The range here is from 12% to 100%. This group, every single feature they looked at, they found inclusivity bugs. What do you think about that? I was kind of blown away by this 32%. I just had no idea it was going to be that high. The 100% though, that was actually good news, because that group, their software was super new. All they had was PowerPoint mock-ups. They had not spent a dime implementing it. And when they found how uninclusive that design was going to be, they threw it out and started over. And so there's kind of a moral there too, which is if you're going to start using GenderMag, use it early while you still want to find problems, inclusivity bugs in your software, and have time to fix them inexpensively. And so one of the recent papers that we wrote was exactly about people in the trenches actually using GenderMag to achieve a difference in their own software. And so we documented some kind of best practices, or at least useful practices, that these teams came up with. And so I'm going to share just a couple of them with you. One of them was abstracting above the particular UI. And so what more than one team did is they started analyzing particular user interfaces or workflows through technology from the perspective of those being an instance of some pattern that they were using throughout many of their products. And so when they picked their scenarios in that way, they were allowing themselves to not have to do multiple evaluations of what turned out to be the same UI pattern. They could abstract above and reuse the fixes they had found in just that one instance. Another thing that the teams have discovered is very compelling is at the end of every session, they calculate a bug bias score. I showed you this bug bias score before, And so when a team takes the results of their inclusivity bug report that they're working on throughout the session, and they count up how many inclusivity bugs they found, they have a sort of a yardstick against which they can measure their progress as they start changing the design. So they can't necessarily use this to compare against, somebody else's scenario, but they can use it as a way to see whether they're moving forward or backward in their own design. And this one is probably the most important one for you to take away. So when you find these things, how do you fix them? And the key is facets drive fixes. So we've talked about risk as one of Abby's facets. Also, it's one of Tim's facets on the other end. Remember, risk tolerant and risk averse. If you use GenderMag, you know why you found something. Some facet is the reason, and you use that then to drive the fix. So here's an example. Here is a product that a team from Microsoft actually used GenderMag on. Here's a blow up of one corner of it. This is the before version. They used GenderMag. They made some changes. Here's the after version. Just glancing at it, you may not see much difference. So how did they know what to change, and why isn't it so very different if it takes down inclusivity bugs? Well, the first thing to look at is the length changed. It was 10, now it's 5. And why is this? It's because of the information processing style facet. This was actually bad for both Abby, who reads a lot, and Tim, who only reads a little bit. In both cases, they were disserved by the longer version. Abby was wasting her time because that's not really what it was for. And Tim was irritated and not wanting to read all that stuff. So it was off-putting to both of them. Second thing to notice is the numbers are gone. This is a search engine, not a data visualization system. And so these numbers were very misleading. They made it look like this was all intended to be visualization. And so people were trying to process this as though it was giving them an information, the kind of answer they sought, which it really wasn't. But when they took them off, it was much clearer that this is actually an actionable checkbox, collection of text boxes, and they're expected to take action and move forward. That was for the motivations facet. So how did this pan out in terms of data? Well, that group ran a comparative empirical study, some people using the before GenderMag version and some people using the after GenderMag version. You just looked at the software that was behind issues 1 and 2 in that paper. And what they did is they redesigned their product around all 5 Abby facets. That's what the orange check marks are, and also 2 of the Tim facets. And the great news is, as you look at the top 2 rows, these fixes, these are like curb cuts territory. They redesigned for Abby, and it got better for both Abby and Tim. That's awesome. Now, down here for another issue, they redesigned for Abby in terms of motivations and risk. But unfortunately, we're in this dreaded trade-off territory here. It did get better for Abby, but worse for Tim. We do not want that. That's not inclusive. Even worse, they kind of blew it here. Got worse for Abby, which is who they reimbursed or redesigned for, and better for Tim. Now we're going to look at the results from issue 4 a little bit more closely. So here are the results, one participant at a time. These are sorted in order of how Abby-ish versus how Tim-ish they were. This is 10 participants. This is 10 more participants. First thing to notice is there's one pure Abby in this before group and one pure Tim in the before and the after group. And everyone else is in the middle. This is again saying you can't pigeonhole people. Second thing to notice, let's just focus on the risk facet. They redesigned for the risk facets. And in the original version, 1, 2 ABBY risk people ran into failures with the task, but no ABBY risk people did after. 1, 2, 3, 4 TIM risk people ran into issues and failures with the task. Afterwards, it went down to 2. So they actually made progress on the risk facet for both the ABBYs and the TIMs. So we haven't been talking about gender for a little while, even though this is GenderMag. So let's come back to it. In this participant pool, the yellow are the women now, and the blue are the men. What we can see is 100% ABBYs. There was 1 woman, 100% TIMs, 1 woman, 1 man. And as you can see, the women are skewing toward the ABBY side, and the men are skewing toward the TIM side. And what was the result of the fixes they made? In the original version, this is failures. Women experienced action failures with the task twice as often as men. In the after version, the gender gap completely disappeared and everybody got better. So that's GenderMag. GenderMag is all about gender inclusivity. But wait, what about all these other kinds of inclusivity? You know, what if we care about age inclusivity or socioeconomic inclusivity? Well, enter InclusiveMag. InclusiveMag is a meta method. It generates inclusive design methods like GenderMag. Woohoo, actionable. This is something that you can do yourselves. So it's done by 2 groups. Inclusivity researchers do the first 2 steps, which I'll talk you through in a minute. And then they hand off their new inclusive design method, like GenderMag, to software practitioners who apply it in the way I've just described so far in the talk. So let's look at that a little more closely. So inclusivity researchers begin by setting the scope. They pick a software genre, such as software for problem solving, for learning, for gaming. They pick a diversity dimension like gender for GenderMag, or age or education or whatever. And then they do a lot of research to understand the range of people along that diversity dimension. And the result of that is a set of facets and facet values. For ABBY, one of the facets was the risk facet. There have been some other mags that have come out of InclusiveMag. One of them is Autism Spectrum Mag. There they came out with a concentration facet and several others. Age Mag, obviously, a memory facet emerged, and so on. Having come up with the facets, these of course are the core of the MAG method, then you build personas. Here is the persona from Autism Mag, actually the 2 personas. This is, I forget his name, and this one is Jane. And here they're talking about the different facet values each has for the concentration facet. Here is, of course, the GenderMag persona. Here's ABBY, and here, as we've seen, is the risk facet. And then you specialize an analytic process. For GenderMag, it was a specialized cognitive walkthrough. Other people have done specialized heuristic evaluation, cognitive walkthrough plus simulation software. Here's a picture of that. So this one was for retinopathy mag, which is a version of a vision mag, if you will. And so they use this simulator to show exactly what users who have that particular vision issue would be seeing on the prototype they were mocking up as they walked through it. And finally, you hand it to the software practitioners. You hand GenderMag or Age Mag or whatever it is you just built to them, and they customize their personas as I've described up here, giving a photo and an age and so on and so forth. And then they use it and they create the list of issues, their little summary, their bug calculation, and their fixes and achieve wonderful results, we hope. So in conclusion, evidence strongly suggests that debiasing software and other technologies really pays off. It pays off in business, it pays off in the classroom, it pays off with web pages, software, education, academia-ware, and society. These methods are practical, and actionable, and you can make a real difference by using them. Here's what one person who started using GenderMag said: "It changed the way I think." So this is my conclusion slide. Oh, it also lists all the countries that are actually using GenderMag. I'm going to come back to this slide in a second. I just want to show you sort of the resources and so on and so forth. So if you want to, you can snap a picture of this or whatever. You can pretty much get whatever you want from gendermag.org. Videos, papers, personas, foundations, customizable personas. There's an open source tool which you can work on if you want. Also, you can just download from the Google Chrome store, and there's also a kit, all freely downloadable. So there we are, and I'm open for questions with plenty of extra time. Yay.
Thank you so much, Margaret. That was great. And I think as the questions start to filter in, we'll take a look at those. But I had a couple that were at the top of my list. One is we embark on this new endeavor where we're thinking about the future of work, particularly in agriculture and automation. There's a lot of fear about displacement in and around the agricultural workforce. And I think we've long thought of it as, not just keeping humans in the loop, but that it is human work that's augmented, by technology. And I guess, in my understanding of your work and these formative studies, how would you create these new personas, facets in and around a workforce that has been largely manual labor for so long, and that digital transformation that undoubtedly is now underway. What are some of the ways in which you gather that information, but then also apply it?
Yeah, that's great. So it's an interesting question. I teach an inclusive design class every year, and I'm teaching it right now. And there is a group of students who have picked a population very much like that. So it's pretty fun. They're embarking on that right now. For them, not only are they gathering information from academic papers, but also at least one member of that team is connected with some migrant farm workers, and he can interview with them, which is a great source of data. So I always recommend to students not only, academic sources and various statistical sources, but also interviews or blog posts that people in that population have done, or YouTube videos that are sort of interviews involving people like that were done for other purposes. So they're just, and of course, there's always observation too. People are interacting with machines, right now already. They have to do it maybe to, deal with whatever bureaucracies they have to deal with. And so even if they don't like technology, they're sort of forced to use it in some situations. And, in some situations, it may be possible to observe that too. Really, the important thing is to understand their attitudes and the things that drive the way they interact with technology. So if I was worried about this wonderful new software that people were, going to be forcing me to use, if I was worried that that was going to displace my job, that would really affect the way I interacted with whatever technology I'm supposed to interact with. It would affect my interest in it, which affects your learning style on new features. It would affect my willingness to put up with it when it isn't working out very well, because I just would not have a very good attitude about it. And it would certainly affect the way I shared data that the software is asking for. and it would affect my attitude toward even keeping it powered on or keeping it with me when I'm doing stuff, because I would be worried about what it was observing. So the question you've asked is an awesome one, and is one of the ones that would be really important to be gathering as one of the facets that needed to be kept in mind for the range of attitudes that software was trying to support.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And there was a question from our live viewing party at UC Merced that, I think touches on this in so much that we now have digital natives, and that there's an entire generation for which, inclusive design may mean one set of things versus some of us that remember, pre-internet, and some of the design features there. And I guess, are we always going to be trying to homogenize those elements, or do we start designing for two different constituencies?
Well, that's a really great question. And one way to look at it is it's saying we need an age mag, because the digital natives and the not digital natives, that's tied to age. So that is one way to go. And one thing I'll point out, though, is that digital natives or not, you still see these wide ranges of behaviors. And so, for example, for the gender diversity dimension that I've spent a lot of time on, I've seen curves that remind you of this one, the men and the women curve on this particular slide. I've seen this for every age group. And so, sometimes the skew toward women or toward the Abby side shifts a little bit. Maybe it's more toward the middle or whatever, but I always see this gender difference in every age group. So this digital native idea is not going to magically wipe out the kinds of differences we see. The other thing I'd like to get on my soapbox about here is, and we don't want it to stamp out differences. I mean, there's all this attention to diversity because we know that diversity is what makes a healthy society and a better team of problem solvers, and why business is so interested in diversity. It's because diverse thought is what makes everything better. And so software trying to make everybody work exactly the same way is actively stamping out diversity of thought, which is exactly what we do not want. So, yeah. And soapbox.
Yeah. There was a question that came up in a separate forum here that I'll ask. And the question is, can you speak more to specific problem areas and processes in academia? You mentioned admissions. How would you evaluate these systems and remedy disparities that you find?
Yeah, okay, great. So using GenderMag, we would go through exactly the same use case walkthrough that we did with the navigating inside a physical bookstore. We start with a scenario, let's say register for a class, and start with a persona. Let's say Abby is an undergraduate student majoring in, I don't know, food science, and walk through some scenario like Abby wants to register for her first term's classes, and try to do it using the developer, saying, what did you want Abby to click on next? And will Abby do that? And so that's how you find them. And what you find, why you found, because you're always relating it to the facets that caused you to say what you found. And then you use those facets to drive the fixes in the same way as that Microsoft example with the search engine that I was showing you midway through the talk. But actually, I'm going to exit out of my slides for a second and unshare and well, maybe I won't, that's just too hard. I guess I'll just bring it back up again. There's this hanging off the GenderMag website. You can click on the design catalog, and the design catalog has a bunch of sample befores and afters and why people fixed things the way they fixed them and what facets were involved. They're sorted. You can search on a particular facet so you can get all the changes people did to accommodate risks, for example. You can also search on the type of application. So like if you're interested in website changes people have made, you can search on that. So that after you've seen some examples of other changes people have done, sometimes that really helps too. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, and there are a couple that are perhaps bundled here. One a little bit more technical. Professor Lisa Yo at UC Merced is asking, is there a way to apply this to policy choices? For example, a real name policy for accounts that has differential harms or risks?
Oh, that's an interesting idea. You know, I love that thought. And I do believe it's applicable. If you took someone like, say, for example, you know, Abby and Tim, and gave them a particular problem that you're trying to solve, this real name change thing, and walked them through the kinds of effects different policies would have on what they see and what they have to do, and consider, you know, how that impacts, say, somebody who's risk tolerant versus somebody who's risk averse, somebody with high self-efficacy versus somebody with low self-efficacy. I think you'd find some really interesting things. I haven't heard of it being applied in this way, but it's sort of like once you get into GenderMag, it's like you apply it to everything. One guy told me it saved his marriage. So yeah, really interesting thought.
I'll have to think about that one a little bit more, but glad to know that there's a lens to apply to our personal lives. In some ways, it relates to this other question then, is that when designing in and around multiple mags into a single interface or application, are there conflicts if you're trying to satisfy age, gender, and other design components? Do you lose anything in the process?
You know, that's an awesome question. The answer is we hope not, because what we're trying to do is stay away from that dreaded trade-off territory. So in coming up with a solution that serves both the risk tolerant and the risk averse, rather than trading off one versus another, we hope it doesn't, but I suspect in the real world it does. For example, by giving different options on the way you can solve a particular problem so that everybody can pick the direction that's the most comfortable for them, you're adding to the complexity of the interface, and so that there could be a certain amount of conflict there. The other piece of that question could have to do with intersectionality. And up until very recently, considering intersectional populations was something that we didn't really know the answer to, either in the GenderMag method or in fact, in the generalized InclusiveMag family. But recently we've made a breakthrough, and we think that there is a systematic way of combining your findings from one dimension at a time to make them suitable for intersectional research, which is kind of counterintuitive because much intersectional research shows the opposite. But we think it has potential, and we hope our paper gets in and that we can try it out.
Great. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap things, Margaret. Thank you again so much for joining us. And if all of those out in the ether would join me, and a little bit of applause. Thank you for taking time out of your day, each and every one. And certainly stay tuned. agaid.org, AgAid, led by our colleagues at Washington State University. We look forward to increased collaboration in and around this area. And thanks for sharing your thoughts and ideas with us.